Walter Briggs was a man most people passed by without a second glance. At 84 years old, he was just an old man shuffling down Main Street in his worn boots and faded olive jacket. Army issue from 1983, patched on the sleeves, with the faint imprint of a name tag still visible over his heart. The name tag had once read W.B. Briggs, but time and wear had blurred the letters. He'd walked this same route every Thursday for the past 12 years. From his small apartment 2 blocks away, Walter made his way to the corner deli to pick up a few essentials, a loaf of bread, cough drops, and sometimes a postcard or two to send to his grandson at the academy. It was a ritual as steady as his worn cane tapping rhythmically on the pavement. This morning was colder than most. A biting chill wrapped around the town like a stubborn fog. Walter pulled his jacket tighter, the fabric stiff with age, but still warm enough to keep the worst of the cold at bay. His body wasn't what it used to be. Years of army deployments had taken their toll. 3 tours, 2 citations, 1 Purple Heart, each chapter in a life full of service. His joints ached, his hearing faded, and his eyes weren't as sharp as they once were. But he carried himself with a quiet dignity that refused to fade. As he stepped out of the deli, the small paper bag tucked under his arm contained the bread, cough drops, and the postcard he hoped to send later that day. Across the street, a group of bikers had gathered outside the local bar. Their chrome machines gleamed in the weak sunlight, polished to a mirror shine. They laughed loudly, their voices rough and careless, leaning on their motorcycles like trophies. Walter paid them no mind. Noise didn't scare him, not anymore. He had heard sounds far worse in places where silence meant danger. As he carefully crossed the street, his jacket brushed against the handlebar of the nearest bike. It was barely a touch, but the motorcycle wobbled slightly. Walter stopped immediately, turned around, and raised his hands in a gentle gesture of apology. "Didn't mean to touch it, son," he said with a small, apologetic smile. His voice was soft, kind, not mocking, not careless, just old and kind. That's when the tallest biker stepped forward. His dark sunglasses caught the noon sun, reflecting back a world that didn't include Walter. "Son," the biker said, voice low and sharp. He didn't ask questions. He didn't inspect the damage. Without warning, his hand swung hard across Walter's face. The loud crack echoed off the brick walls of Main Street. Walter collapsed onto the pavement, the paper bag tearing as it hit the ground. Bread scattered into the gutter like forgotten memories. The biker laughed with his friends. No one moved. No one said a word. The bar crowd stared silently, drinks in hand, faces turned away. Phones stayed in pockets. Walter did not cry out. He sat up slowly, one knee trembling beneath him, his face flushed with humiliation more than pain. His hand still clutched the crumpled bag as he carefully gathered the scattered bread, placing it gently back inside. People kept walking by, avoiding his eyes. A waitress peeked through the diner window, then quickly turned back to her table. A teenager passed with earbuds in, oblivious or uncaring. Walter's cheek burned, but he didn't reach to touch it. Instead, he reached for his cane, which had rolled a few feet away. Limping, he bent down with a soft groan, not from pain, but from the weight of being seen and ignored. He sat on the bench beside the bus stop, exhaling shakily as the cold air bit deep into his lungs. His hearing aid buzzed faintly, but his pride buzzed louder. Back in 1970, Walter had pulled 3 soldiers out of a burning jeep outside Hugh City. Now, in 2025, not one stranger would hand him a paper towel for the blood at the corner of his mouth. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a battered cell phone, cracked screen, just a few buttons left functional. On the screen was a single contact labeled Eagle 6, emergency only. He tapped the name once and leaned back on the bench, waiting. The world kept moving around him, silent and indifferent. But Walter Briggs was still here, still waiting for something, proof that he still existed. The ambulance sirens screamed like distant ghosts as they cut through the dull hum of the afternoon. Walter lay on the stretcher, his battered cheek throbbing, his breath shallow but steady. The paramedics moved swiftly around him, their voices clipped, efficient, but impersonal. To them, he was just another call. In the hospital waiting room, the cold fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the tired faces of strangers. Walter's granddaughter, Emily, sat clutching a wrinkled photo of her grandfather in uniform. She had called as soon as she heard. Emily's voice trembled as she recounted what she knew to the nurses. He didn't fight back. He just got hit out of nowhere. The nurse nodded, her eyes soft but tired. We're doing everything we can. But no one mentioned the word Walter wanted to hear. Justice. Outside the emergency room, Detective Marcus Hale lit a cigarette, the flame, briefly illuminating his weathered face. He had seen his share of violence, but the attack on Walter struck a nerve. Here was a man who had given his life for his country, now beaten down on the streets of his own town. Why did no one help? Marcus muttered under his breath. The question gnawed at him as he flicked the cigarette away. Back in the hospital room, Walter was awake but disoriented. Emily sat by his side, holding his hand tightly. His eyes scanned the sterile ceiling, the steady beep of the heart monitor, a stark contrast to the chaos outside his door. I'm fine, he whispered hoarsely. It's just a scratch. Emily shook her head, tears pooling in her eyes. Grandpa, you don't have to be a hero all the time. Walter smiled faintly, the lines on his face deepening. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones you don't fight. As night fell, the city outside remained oblivious to the quiet, suffering of one of its own. Walter's story was just one of many untold, but for those who knew his name, it was a reminder of the invisible scars borne by those who served, and the silence that follows when they are forgotten. Detective. Hale promised himself he wouldn't let this case slip away into the shadows. Walter Briggs deserved better. The city owed him that much, and Walter, despite everything, was still holding on to dignity, to hope, to the faint promise that maybe, just maybe, someone would hear his story. The morning light poured through, the cracked blinds casting long, jagged shadows across the cluttered living room. Walter sat quietly in his worn armchair, staring at the wall where a faded photo of his unit hung. The faces of his brothers-in-arms stared back at him, silent witnesses to battles long past, but the war he now faced was one he never expected. The city's neglect weighed heavy on him, an invisible enemy more relentless than any combat he had known. The bruise on his cheek throbbed with every heartbeat, a painful reminder of a night when safety was nothing but a memory. Emily paced the room, phone pressed tightly to her ear, her voice sharp with frustration. I've called every agency, every councilman's office. Nobody's doing anything. They treat it like a statistic, not a man who fought for this country. Walter's jaw tightened. He wanted to tell her to stop, that fighting wasn't his way anymore, but something inside him sparked. Maybe it was the anger, maybe it was the pride, but he refused to be invisible. Later that afternoon, the local community center buzzed with activity. Volunteers handed out food and blankets to those who, like Walter, struggled in the shadows of a city that had forgotten them. Walter sat near the back, listening as a young man spoke passionately about change, about fighting for respect and recognition. You don't have to face this alone, the man said, eyes scanning the room. We're stronger together. Walter felt a stirring deep inside, something he hadn't felt in years, a flicker of hope, fragile but real. Maybe this was the moment to fight again, not with fists, but with voice. That night, Walter sat by his window, looking out at the flickering city lights. The pain in his body was still there, but something heavier had started to lift. The silence that had once threatened to swallow him whole was breaking. For the first time in a long time, Walter was ready to make noise. The tension had been building for weeks, an invisible storm gathering strength beneath the city's calm surface. Walter felt it every morning when he woke, a restless energy in his bones. The quiet desperation of his life was giving way to something louder, something that could no longer be ignored. Since the story about his struggles had gone viral, everything changed. No longer was he just a man scraping by on the margins. He was now the symbol of a growing movement, a voice for countless others who had been silenced. The media outlets clamored to interview him. Local politicians scrambled to meet him. Activists reached out, eager to join forces. Suddenly, Walter was at the center of a storm he hadn't anticipated. The city square was packed that Saturday afternoon, a sea of faces filled with determination and hope. Families, workers, students and elders all stood shoulder to shoulder, their banners held high. "Justice for the forgotten," one read. Another declared, "Equality now." The chants rolled across the crowd, each voice adding power to the message. Walter stood on the makeshift stage, his heart pounding, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the microphone. The words he had rehearsed in the quiet moments of the night came rushing out in a torrent, raw and unfiltered. We are not invisible. We are not voiceless. For too long they have ignored our pain, our struggles, but no more. Today we stand together, demanding the dignity and respect every human deserves. A roar of approval rose up in response, shaking the air. Walter looked out over the crowd, seeing faces bright with tears and smiles alike. He realized that the fight wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to all of them. It belonged to anyone who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, or forgotten. Inside City Hall, the mood was far from celebratory. The mayor sat rigidly at his desk, flanked by advisors whispering urgent counsel. The phone never stopped ringing, reporters, activists, even national figures demanding answers. The mayor's fingers drummed nervously on the polished wood as he scanned the latest polling numbers showing his approval ratings plummeting. The mayor had initially dismissed Walter's story as an isolated incident, a cautionary tale that wouldn't gain traction. But he now faced a reckoning. The tide of public opinion was shifting fast, and his administration was on the defensive. Emily, Walter's closest ally and unwavering supporter, moved through the crowd like a beacon of calm. Her presence steadied Walter when the weight of the moment threatened to overwhelm him. "You're stronger than you know," she whispered before he took the stage, "and this movement is bigger than any one person. Trust it." Walter nodded, grateful beyond words. Without Emily, he might have crumbled long ago. She had believed in him when he didn't believe in himself, and now she was the backbone of a movement that refused to back down. The speeches went late into the evening. Community leaders shared stories of hardship and hope, each testimony weaving a tapestry of shared experience. The energy was electric, charged with the possibility of real change. Walter's voice, though tired, remained steady as he laid out the demands. Increased funding for housing, accessible health care, fair wages, and meaningful representation. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, Walter knew the road ahead would be anything but smooth. The very institutions they challenged were powerful, entrenched and ready to fight back. Lobbyists met behind closed doors, preparing counter-arguments. Corporate interests sent out carefully crafted press releases painting the protesters as radicals and troublemakers. Walter also understood the personal cost. The spotlight brought unwanted attention, some of it supportive but much of it hostile. Late-night threats, the strain on his family, the exhaustion that seeped into his bones. Yet, every morning he woke with the same fierce determination to keep pushing forward. In the days that followed, the city council convened an emergency session. For the first time, Walter was invited to speak directly to the officials. The chamber was packed, the air heavy with anticipation. Walter stepped to the podium, looking each council member in the eye. "You have heard our voices outside these walls," he said firmly. "Now it's time to act. We need concrete policies that address the root causes of inequality. We need transparency. We need accountability. Not tomorrow, not next year, now." Some council members nodded in agreement, while others exchanged skeptical glances. The political divide was clear, but the movement had cracked open a door that could no longer be closed. Walter left the chamber with cautious optimism. The battle was far from over, but the momentum had shifted. The public was watching, and their voices would hold the officials accountable. Back at home, Walter sat, with Emily both exhausted but hopeful. "This is just the beginning," he said quietly. "There's so much to do, so many battles ahead." Emily smiled, squeezing his hand. "We'll face them together, one step at a time." As night fell over the city, the lights from the protest signs still glowed faintly in Walter's mind. Change was no longer a distant dream. It was within reach. And Walter knew that no matter how hard the fight, the cause was worth every sacrifice. The echoes of the protest still reverberated through the city, but now the fight was shifting from the streets to the halls of power and the shadows behind them. Walter knew the movement had reached a tipping point, but with it came a fierce backlash that threatened everything they had worked so hard to build. The very institutions they challenged were organizing a counteroffensive. Powerful lobbyists poured millions into media campaigns aimed at discrediting the movement and its leaders. Television news segments framed the protests as unruly and disruptive, while social media was flooded with bots and trolls, spreading misinformation and outright lies. Walter found himself the target of smear campaigns, his character attacked in ways that were both deeply personal and calculated. Photos were taken out of context, stories twisted, and anonymous allegations surfaced to undermine his credibility. The strain was palpable. His supporters tried to shield him from the worst of it, but the toll was undeniable. In the early mornings, Walter stared at the headlines, the vitriol cutting deeper than any physical threat. Messages flooded his phone, some from allies, many more from enemies. Death threats, slurs, and attempts to intimidate became part of his daily reality. But through it all, he refused to back down. Emily stood firmly by his side, her resolve never wavering. She became a pillar of strength not only for Walter, but also for the growing network of activists. Together, they organized training sessions on digital security and crisis management, determined to outmaneuver the sophisticated tactics being used against them. Meanwhile, inside City Hall, the opposition to reform hardened. Many council members, who once seemed open, now dug in their heels, wary of the political risks of siding with a cause that some branded as radical. The mayor, feeling the pressure, walked a tightrope, making vague promises while stalling real change behind closed doors. Walter's frustration grew. He realized that beyond the public battle lay a much darker war of influence, power, and fear. The old guard was fighting tooth and nail to preserve the status quo. But the movement was no longer just a loose coalition of voices. It had become a force with strategic vision and resilience. One evening, as Walter sat in a cramped office cluttered with flyers, plans, and news clippings, his phone buzzed with an encrypted message from a whistleblower inside City Hall. The message contained proof of backdoor deals to undermine affordable housing initiatives and funnel public funds to private developers. The evidence was damning, a smoking gun that could expose corruption at the highest levels. Walter shared the documents with trusted journalists and activists. The story broke wide open, sending shockwaves through the city. Public outrage surged, demanding immediate investigations and accountability. The mayor's office scrambled to contain the damage, but the momentum was unstoppable. In the weeks that followed, the movement gained new allies from unexpected quarters, reform-minded politicians, community leaders, and even some business figures willing to speak out against corruption. The tide was turning again, but the battle was far from won. Walter's personal life, however, paid a heavy price. The constant spotlight strained his relationships. Friends who once stood by him grew distant, intimidated by the controversy. His family worried for his safety and well-being. The nights were the hardest, sleepless and haunted by the weight of responsibility. Yet, in the midst of the storm, moments of hope shone through. A young mother approached Walter after a rally, her eyes filled with tears. She shared her story of homelessness and how the movement had given her a voice and a glimpse of hope. These encounters fueled Walter's determination, reminding him why the fight mattered. Emily often reminded him, "This isn't just about today. It's about laying the foundation for the future, for the children who deserve better than what we have now." Her words anchored him when despair threatened to consume him. The media frenzy intensified when a national news outlet picked up the story, shining a spotlight on Walter and the movement. Interviews, panels, and debates followed. Walter used these platforms to call for unity and systemic change, emphasizing that the struggle was not about politics, but about humanity. But not everyone welcomed the attention. Extremists on both sides tried to hijack the narrative, either by pushing radical agendas or attempting to silence dissent through violence and intimidation. The movement faced the delicate task of maintaining its core values while navigating a complex and often hostile landscape. One night, After a particularly contentious city council meeting, Walter returned home to find his apartment vandalized, windows shattered, walls sprayed with hateful graffiti. The message was clear. The fight was far from over, and the forces aligned against them were willing to escalate. Instead of retreating, Walter used the incident to galvanize supporters. "We will not be silenced," he declared at the next rally. "Every act of intimidation only strengthens our resolve." The movement's resilience inspired similar protests in neighboring cities, creating a regional wave of demand for justice and reform. Activists formed coalitions, sharing resources, strategies, and stories. The local battle had sparked a broader awakening. Through it all, Walter kept returning to the core truth that had propelled him from obscurity, the belief that ordinary people, united by purpose and courage, could change the course of history. The backlash was fierce, but so was their spirit. The chapter closed with Walter standing before a crowd larger than ever, a sea of faces illuminated by the glow of phone screens and candles. His voice rose above the noise, clear and unwavering. "This is our moment," he said, "not just to fight but to build a future where justice is real, where dignity is a right, not a privilege. Together, we are unstoppable." As the crowd erupted in cheers, Walter knew the road ahead would be long and hard, but the movement had become more than a cause. It was a movement of hope, defiance, and unwavering humanity. And he was ready to lead it, no matter the cost. The battle that had raged on streets and in council chambers was no longer contained within city limits. Walter and the movement now faced a pivotal crossroads. The corruption and inequality they fought against were systemic, entrenched, and powerful. The old walls protecting privilege and greed weren't just figurative. They were literal barriers, bureaucratic labyrinths designed to deter change. Walter sat in the dimly lit community center, surrounded by a diverse group of activists, lawyers, and local leaders. The atmosphere was tense but charged with determination. Everyone knew that after exposing the scandal and surviving the backlash, the next phase demanded something different. It was time to break the walls, in law, in policy, and in public consciousness. They had spent months gathering data, testimonies, and legal evidence. The movement's network had grown to thousands, fueled by shared outrage and hope. But the real test lay ahead, turning the momentum into lasting reform, overcoming legal hurdles, and dismantling the systems that perpetuated injustice. Walter addressed the group, his voice steady but urgent. "This is where the fight becomes strategic. We have exposed corruption, and that has rallied support. But to truly change things, we need to infiltrate the system itself, not just protest against it, but rewrite it, change laws, regulations, and hold those accountable who have been above the law for too long." Emily, who had become the movement's legal strategist, stepped forward. "We've identified key areas to target: zoning laws that enable exclusionary housing practices, campaign finance reforms to curb corporate influence, and stronger tenant protections. Each of these is a wall that keeps people out or silences their voices." They planned a multi-pronged approach, launching lawsuits, lobbying sympathetic lawmakers, and mobilizing public pressure campaigns. The goal was ambitious: to overhaul the city's political and economic structures that had long served the wealthy elite. One of the first battles centered on a controversial housing project backed by private developers with deep ties to city officials. The project promised luxury condos, but displaced hundreds of low-income families. Walter's team filed a class action lawsuit alleging violations of tenant rights and environmental laws, while Emily coordinated a public campaign to expose the IT developers' ties to corrupt politicians. Media coverage intensified, shining a harsh spotlight on the cozy relationships between business and government. Town halls erupted in heated debates. For the first time, many residents began questioning not just individual projects, but the entire system that allowed such abuses. At the same time, inside the courthouse, Walter and Emily worked with a dedicated team of lawyers and legal experts. The case was complex, fraught with procedural obstacles and deliberate delays by the opposition. But every delay was met with renewed public pressure and grassroots mobilization, turning court dates into rallies and press events. The movement, also focused on winning allies within the city council. Some younger, more progressive members had quietly reached out, inspired by the movement's energy and unwilling to be complicit in the status quo. These alliances were fragile, often tested by political pressures and threats, but they offered a foothold inside the government. Meanwhile, Walter's personal life remained under strain. The relentless pace and constant scrutiny had taken a toll. Yet in moments of quiet, he found strength in small victories. A tenant winning a legal battle, a new ally speaking out, a young activist stepping up to lead. These moments rekindled his belief that change was possible. One breakthrough came when a prominent council member publicly endorsed the movement's demands, calling for an independent investigation into the city's development policies. The announcement sent shockwaves through the political establishment. Opponents scrambled to discredit the council member, but the tide was shifting. The movement's message was no longer confined to rallies or social media. It was becoming a political force. Polls showed growing public support for reforms, and several local candidates pledged to make housing justice a central platform in upcoming elections. As momentum built, the opposition grew more desperate and aggressive. Threats against activists escalated, and attempts to intimidate legal teams increased. Walter himself was surveilled and harassed, but rather than retreat, the movement doubled down, strengthening security protocols and solidarity. A particularly tense moment came when a key developer attempted to bribe a council member to kill the reform bill. The attempt was uncovered by an investigative journalist working with Walter's team, leading to arrests and resignations that rocked City Hall. This scandal energized the public further and emboldened reformers. The City Council passed a landmark housing reform package, the most comprehensive in decades, including provisions for affordable housing mandates, rent control expansions, and transparency in development deals. Walter stood before a crowd outside City Hall, his voice ringing with conviction. We have broken walls today, not just physical ones, but the walls of silence, fear, and corruption. This victory belongs to everyone who dared to believe that justice is possible. The celebration was tempered by realism. Walter knew that entrenched interests would continue to resist and that reforms required vigilant enforcement. But the victory was a turning point, proof that sustained collective action could dismantle even the most fortified systems. In the months that followed, the movement expanded its focus, tackling education, policing, and environmental justice. Walter's vision of systemic change became a blueprint for other cities grappling with similar challenges. Emily's legal work became a model for activist-lawyer collaborations nationwide, while Walter's leadership inspired a new generation of organizers committed to intersectional justice. Despite the hardships and sacrifices, the movement's success proved that change is not only possible, but inevitable when people unite with purpose and courage. As Walter looked out over a city still marked by inequality, but now filled with the promise of transformation, he felt a deep sense of gratitude and resolve. The walls had been cracked, and the journey toward justice had only just begun. The movement had grown beyond anything Walter could have imagined. What started as a handful of impassioned voices had blossomed into a powerful force demanding real change. But with power came new challenges. The stakes had never been higher. The walls they had begun to crack were showing signs of crumbling, and both allies and adversaries knew it. Walter stood in the middle of a crowded community hall, surrounded by local leaders, activists, and residents from every corner of the city. The air buzzed with anticipation. Tonight was not just a meeting, it was a gathering of hearts and minds ready to take the next big leap. "We're at a crossroads," Walter said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "We've exposed corruption, won court battles, and forced change in City Hall. But now the fight moves to the next level. We have to ensure these reforms are implemented, that they don't get watered down or ignored. This is our turning point." People nodded, some fists clenched in determination, others' eyes glistening with hope. The victories had sparked a fire, but Walter knew the opposition would not go quietly. The entrenched interests, the developers, the politicians in their pockets, and the wealthy elite were regrouping, desperate to hold on to their power. Emily stepped forward, laying out the plan for a citywide initiative to monitor the reforms and hold officials accountable. "We'll need watchdog committees, transparent reporting, and community oversight," she explained. "This isn't just about passing laws, it's about changing the culture of governance." Walter's mind raced with possibilities. The momentum was theirs to harness, but they had to stay vigilant. The next challenge was to broaden the coalition, to bring in voices from other marginalized communities, labor unions, faith groups, and young voters who had been disillusioned for too long. One of the most powerful moments came when Maria, a tenant leader who had once feared eviction, took the stage. Her voice, raw with emotion, carried through the hall. "I used to feel invisible, like my voice didn't matter. But this movement gave me courage. We are not just fighting for homes, we are fighting for dignity, for a future where no one is left behind." Her words resonated deeply. They reminded everyone why the struggle was worth it. For Walter, they were a call to arms, to deepen the movement's reach and power. At the same time, political shifts were underway. A few reform-minded council members began to push for greater transparency and stronger enforcement of the new laws. But pushback was fierce. Lobbyists flooded meetings with false promises and veiled threats. Media outlets owned by powerful interests spun narratives that questioned the movement's motives, branding it as radical or disruptive. Walter knew the importance of controlling the narrative. He reached out to independent journalists and social media influencers who believed in the cause. They helped amplify stories of real people affected by the reforms, stories of families saved from eviction, of neighborhoods revitalized without displacement. Meanwhile, the movement's legal teams prepared for the inevitable lawsuits aimed at rolling back the progress. Emily spearheaded these efforts, assembling an elite group of pro bono lawyers ready to defend the reforms in court. The tension came to a head when a powerful development corporation filed a lawsuit challenging the affordable housing mandate, claiming it violated their property rights and business freedom. It was a direct assault on the movement's core victories. Walter saw this as a test of everything they had built. "This is not just about buildings or profits," he said in a press conference. "It's about justice. We will fight in the courts and in the streets until every person has a place to call home." The legal battle was fierce and dragged on for months, but the movement's supporters remained steadfast. Protests swelled outside courthouses, rallies brought thousands to city streets, and petitions flooded lawmakers' offices. In the courtroom, Emily delivered powerful arguments that combined legal expertise with a moral imperative. She highlighted the human cost of unchecked development, displacement, homelessness, broken communities, and called on the court to uphold the public interest. Slowly but surely, cracks appeared in the opposition's defenses. Media coverage shifted as journalists uncovered deeper connections between the corporation and corrupt officials. Public opinion tilted in favor of the movement. Then came the breakthrough. The court ruled in favor of the city's housing reforms, affirming the government's right to impose affordable housing requirements. The decision was hailed as a landmark victory nationwide and sent a clear message: the era of unchecked corporate influence was ending. Celebrations erupted, but Walter remained grounded. "This is a win, yes," he told the crowd at the victory rally. "But the real work continues. We must ensure these laws translate into real homes for people who need them." He emphasized the need for ongoing vigilance and community involvement. The fight was no longer just about resistance. It was about building new structures of power that reflected the values of equity and justice. The victory energized new leaders to step forward. Young activists, many of whom had grown up in the neighborhoods affected, took on organizing roles. Labor unions pledged support, seeing housing justice as integral to workers' rights. Faith leaders joined calls for compassionate policies that honored human dignity. Walter watched as the movement evolved from a protest to a powerful coalition, one that could sustain pressure on policymakers and inspire other cities grappling with similar issues. As the months passed, affordable housing projects broke ground, schools in underfunded neighborhoods received new investments, and tenant protections strengthened enforcement mechanisms. The city's skyline began to change, not just with new buildings but with renewed hope. Yet Walter understood that systems do not transform overnight. The elite's resistance had not vanished. It had become subtler, cloaked in rhetoric about economic freedom and property rights. But the movement had learned to adapt, using transparency and community power to expose hidden agendas. One evening, reflecting on the journey, Walter recognized the true turning point had not been a single law or court ruling. It was the awakening of a collective conscience, a refusal to accept injustice as inevitable, and a belief that ordinary people could remake their world. This realization fueled his resolve for the next battles ahead. Poverty, racial inequality, environmental degradation, all intertwined challenges that demanded the same courage and solidarity. Walter knew the road would be long and arduous, but standing with his comrades, hearing the stories of those whose lives had been transformed, he felt an unshakable conviction. The walls were falling, and on their ruins, a new city was rising, a city where justice was not an ideal but a reality lived by all. The victory in the housing battle was more than a local triumph. It was a spark that ignited movements far beyond the city's borders. Walter and his team watched with a mix of pride and cautious optimism as activists from neighboring states began reaching out, eager to learn, to replicate the strategies that had shifted the power balance in their city. But the ripple effect was not limited to grassroots efforts. It reached into the halls of state legislatures and even Washington, D.C. legislators who had previously ignored or opposed housing reforms suddenly found themselves confronted by a growing national consensus that the era of rampant inequality was untenable. The housing crisis was a symptom of a larger problem, a systemic failure that demanded bold solutions. Walter was invited to testify before a congressional committee on urban development and affordable housing. As he stepped up to the podium, the weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders. This was a stage far larger than any community hall or city council chamber. The nation was watching. I stand here, not just as an organizer from one city, but as a voice for millions struggling to keep a roof over their heads, Walter began. His voice was calm but passionate, carrying the resolve of those who had fought and won on the front lines. He laid out the story of the movement, how people came together to demand justice, how they faced down powerful interests, and how their victory proved that change was possible when ordinary people refused to be silenced. But Walter was clear that the battle was far from over. "We need a federal framework to support cities and states in this work," he said. "Affordable housing must be recognized as a fundamental human right, protected and expanded with adequate funding and regulation." The committee members exchanged glances. Some nodded in agreement, others took notes, but Walter could sense the political calculations swirling beneath the surface. The pushback was subtle but real. Powerful lobbyists had their own agendas, and not all elected officials were ready to confront entrenched wealth. Back home, Walter's team continued building bridges. They partnered with unions, tenant associations, environmental groups, and faith organizations to forge a broad coalition capable of sustaining pressure on lawmakers at every level. The strategy was multifaceted: grassroots mobilization, legal advocacy, media campaigns, and direct engagement with policymakers. Each component reinforced the others, creating a resilient network that could weather political storms. Meanwhile, the media landscape began shifting. Independent outlets and social platforms became crucial battlegrounds for shaping public opinion. Stories of families benefiting from new housing policies were shared widely, humanizing what had often been reduced to abstract statistics. However, the opposition was relentless. Corporate interests launched well-funded campaigns, framing affordable housing as a threat to economic growth and property values. Fake news and misinformation spread rapidly, sowing confusion and fear. Walter and his team responded by doubling down on transparency and community education. Town halls, workshops, and social media initiatives helped debunk myths and highlight the real benefits of equitable development: stronger neighborhoods, safer streets, and economic opportunity for all. One breakthrough came when a respected economist published a study showing that investing in affordable housing generated significant returns in public health, education outcomes, and job creation. The report became a key tool in lobbying efforts, cutting through partisan rhetoric with hard data. At the grassroots level, new leaders emerged. Young activists who had grown up in marginalized communities took up the mantle, infusing the movement with energy and fresh perspectives. Their voices pushed for intersectional approaches, linking housing justice with racial equity, environmental sustainability, and workers' rights. Walter found himself mentoring these rising stars, sharing lessons learned from years on the front lines. He emphasized the importance of unity and adaptability, warning that victories could be fragile if the movement lost sight of its core values. As the movement gained momentum nationally, Walter faced personal challenges. The relentless pace of activism took a toll on his health and relationships. Late nights, constant travel, and high-stakes battles left little time for rest or family. He struggled with guilt, feeling torn between the demands of leadership and his own well-being. Yet the faces of those who had been uplifted by their work kept him going. He knew that the stakes were too high to slow down. In quieter moments, Walter reflected on the journey so far. The movement had evolved from a desperate fight for survival into a hopeful vision for a more just society. But he understood that true transformation required systemic change, changes that could withstand political shifts and economic crises. He began exploring alliances with progressive lawmakers, philanthropists, and business leaders, willing to commit resources and influence to the cause. These partnerships were delicate, requiring trust and shared vision, but they offered pathways to scale impact. One particularly promising collaboration involved a coalition of tech companies pledging to invest in affordable housing projects and support community-driven initiatives. Walter saw this as a chance to harness innovation and capital for social good, without compromising grassroots autonomy. However, skepticism ran deep. Some activists worried that corporate involvement could dilute the movement's radical edge or co-opt its agenda. Walter navigated these tensions carefully, striving to balance pragmatism with principle. The ripple effect was also felt in policy arenas. Several states passed legislation inspired by the city's reforms, adopting stronger tenant protections, rent control measures, and incentives for affordable housing development. National advocacy groups cited Walter's movement as a blueprint for success. But with growth came complexity. Managing diverse coalitions and competing priorities tested leadership skills. Disagreements arose over strategy, messaging, and resource allocation. Walter learned to listen deeply, mediate conflicts, and foster inclusive decision-making processes. Throughout it all, the movement maintained a fierce commitment to centering the voices of those most impacted. This principle was not just ethical, it was strategic. Authentic representation built credibility and ensured policies addressed real needs. Walter's team launched new campaigns focusing on homelessness prevention, emergency rental assistance, and community land trusts. Each initiative required navigating bureaucratic hurdles, fundraising challenges, and political resistance, but progress was steady. As the movement's influence expanded, so did its visibility. Walter was invited to speak at national conferences, featured in major publications, and approached by documentary filmmakers seeking to tell their story. He embraced these opportunities to amplify the message, but remained wary of celebrity. For Walter, the movement was bigger than any individual. It was a collective force for change grounded in solidarity. Toward the chapter's close, Walter convened a summit of leaders from across the country. They shared successes and setbacks, strategized for the future, and forged a national alliance committed to housing justice. The atmosphere was electric with possibility. For the first time in decades, the tide seemed to be turning. The movement, that had begun in one city, was becoming a nationwide call for equity and dignity. Walter felt a deep sense of purpose. The ripple effect was not just spreading ideas, it was changing lives, shaping policy, and reclaiming democracy itself. And while the road ahead remained uncertain, Walter knew they were no longer alone. Together, they were building a new foundation for a fairer, more inclusive America. As the housing movement's momentum grew, so did the resistance from those whose power and profits were threatened. What had begun as a fight for dignity and justice increasingly became a battleground of High stakes and hard lines. Walter and his allies found themselves facing a backlash more aggressive and coordinated than anything they had encountered before. The corporate landlords and real estate moguls, rattled by their losses, mobilized an arsenal of political influence, legal maneuvers, and media campaigns. They framed the movement as a radical threat to free enterprise, warning that rent control and tenant protections would stifle investment, drive up costs, and worsen housing shortages. Billboards popped up across major cities, emblazoned with slogans like "Keep our city open for business and protect property rights." Sponsored op-eds flooded newspapers, arguing that the housing crisis was best solved by market forces, not government intervention. Television ads targeted swing districts, urging voters to reject candidates who supported affordable housing reforms. Walter knew these were calculated efforts to divide public opinion. He watched as pundits debated fiercely on cable news, often distorting facts and inflaming fears. The movement's victories were recast as reckless experiments threatening economic stability. Simultaneously, a wave of legal challenges swept through courts at all levels. Corporations sued cities for overreach, citing constitutional protections of property rights. Judges, some sympathetic but many influenced by conservative legal doctrines, issued injunctions and rulings that slowed or rolled back reforms. One landmark case involved a coalition of landlords suing the city to overturn rent control laws. The case dragged on for months, draining resources and sapping morale. Walter and his legal team scrambled to counter these attacks, mounting defenses that emphasized the human cost of evictions and displacement. On the ground, tensions escalated. Tenants who had begun to feel empowered faced intimidation tactics, harassment. By landlords, threats of eviction and in some instances violence. Grassroots organizers received hate mail and death threats. The stakes were no longer abstract policy debates, but matters of personal safety. Walter's movement responded by strengthening community protections, organizing rapid response teams to support tenants in crisis, and fostering alliances with local law enforcement willing to uphold fair housing laws. They pushed for legislation criminalizing harassment and increasing penalties for illegal evictions. Yet the backlash was not limited to the housing sector. It resonated through the political arena. Conservative politicians capitalized on fears of overregulation and government overreach to rally their bases. They painted Walter and his allies as dangerous radicals, out of touch with economic realities. Media outlets sympathetic to these views amplified the narrative, framing the movement as part of a broader anti-business agenda. Social media. Platforms became battlegrounds for misinformation, with bots and trolls spreading falsehoods about the movement's intentions and tactics. Walter grappled with these challenges, knowing that public perception was critical. The movement's survival depended not just on legal victories, but on winning hearts and minds. To that end, they invested heavily in storytelling, sharing personal stories of families saved from homelessness, communities revitalized, and lives transformed. One particularly powerful campaign featured a single mother who had been evicted multiple times but found stability through newly enacted tenant protections. Her story resonated widely, humanizing the abstract debate and countering negative stereotypes. Despite these efforts, the backlash took a toll. Funding became harder to secure as some donors balked at the growing controversy. Internal debates intensified over strategy and messaging, whether to moderate demands to appeal to broader audiences or double down on bold reforms. Walter often found himself at the center of these tensions. His leadership was questioned by some who feared the movement was losing its grassroots identity. He navigated these waters carefully, emphasizing transparency and inclusion, but the strain was palpable. International observers took note of the turmoil. Housing advocates in other countries reached out, offering solidarity and sharing lessons from their own struggles. The fight for affordable housing was becoming a global cause, reflecting broader issues of inequality and justice. Amid the conflict, moments of hope emerged. Some local governments doubled down on protections despite legal risks, signaling a growing willingness to challenge entrenched interests. Courts in certain jurisdictions ruled favorably on tenant rights, setting important precedents. Walter and his coalition also found allies in unexpected places, progressive business leaders who recognized that stable housing was essential to economic productivity and social cohesion. Partnerships with these figures brought new resources and strategic leverage. But as the backlash intensified, so too did the risks. A high-profile eviction in a major city sparked protests that escalated into clashes with police, leading to arrests and injuries. The media coverage was polarized. Some hailed the activists as heroes, others condemned them as troublemakers. Walter reflected on the movement's trajectory. The backlash was a test of resilience, forcing them to refine tactics, build deeper coalitions, and articulate a compelling vision of justice. It underscored the deep structural power resisting change, but also the necessity of persistence. He recognized that the fight for housing justice was not a short campaign, but a long struggle requiring sustained commitment. The stakes went beyond roofs and rents. They were about the right to live with dignity and security in a rapidly changing society. As Chapter 9 closes, Walter prepares for what promises to be the most challenging phase yet. The backlash is fierce, but so is the resolve. The movement stands at a crossroads, poised to either falter under pressure or emerge stronger and more united. The backlash against Walter's housing movement had reached a fever pitch, but what came next surprised everyone. In the middle of the storm, a pivotal moment emerged that would shift the narrative and alter the trajectory of the fight for affordable housing forever. Walter was in his modest office late one evening when he received a call that changed everything. On the line was a representative from one of the city's largest labor unions, an organization with tens of thousands of members. The union had watched the escalating conflict with concern and felt a strong urge to intervene. "We want to join you," the voice said simply. "We believe housing justice is labor justice. Our members are your tenants. We want to stand with you." This call sparked a surge of energy and renewed hope. The alliance between the tenants' movement and the labor union was unprecedented, a powerful coalition that united two forces long treated as separate and distinct. It sent a message to the city's establishment. The fight was growing, becoming harder to ignore. Walter immediately convened meetings with union leaders. They shared stories of workers struggling to pay rent on low wages, forced to choose between food and housing. For years, the working class had been squeezed from both sides, exploited by employers and pushed out by soaring rents. Now they saw a chance for collective action that could change the game. The labor union brought more than numbers. They brought organizational strength, political clout, and resources. Together, they crafted a new platform that linked workplace rights to housing rights, framing the issue as part of a broader campaign for economic justice. The coalition's message was clear. Stable, affordable housing was essential for workers' well-being, productivity, and dignity. Without secure homes, workers faced constant instability, stress, and hardship that undercut their ability to fight for better wages and conditions. This fusion of tenant and labor movements electrified the city's political landscape. Local. Politicians who had previously dismissed tenant demands began to take notice, wary of a unified front that could sway elections and mobilize vast constituencies. Public opinion started to shift. Polls showed increasing support for rent control, eviction protections, and expanded affordable housing programs. People were connecting the dots between housing insecurity and economic inequality in a way that transcended partisan divides. Walter and his coalition seized the moment. They organized massive rallies, drawing tens of thousands to the streets. The energy was palpable. Families, workers, students, seniors, all united behind a common cause. The city's iconic landmarks became backdrops for impassioned speeches, heartfelt testimonies, and calls to action. One rally featured a veteran worker who recounted losing his home after decades of labor due to skyrocketing rent. His story moved many to tears and underscored the human cost behind the statistics. The coalition also intensified pressure on city council members. They presented detailed policy proposals backed by rigorous research and community input that offered practical solutions for expanding affordable housing and strengthening tenant protections. Behind the scenes, Walter's legal team prepared for new legislative battles, anticipating further pushback from real estate interests. But the united front made it harder for opponents to isolate or weaken the movement. Amid this momentum, a surprising breakthrough came from the mayor's office. Facing growing public pressure and sensing the political tide, the mayor announced a bold initiative to tackle the housing crisis. The plan included rent stabilization measures, incentives for affordable development, and expanded funding for housing assistance. While the mayor's proposal was not perfect and left some activists wanting more, it marked a significant shift, a recognition from the highest level of local government that the housing crisis demanded urgent action. Walter and his coalition cautiously embraced the initiative, viewing it as a platform to build upon rather than an endpoint. They pledged to hold officials accountable, ensuring the promises translated into real change. Meanwhile, the media narrative began to evolve. Stories highlighted the coalition's broad base and the compelling personal stories behind the movement. Journalists who had once portrayed the activists as extremists now framed them as community heroes fighting for basic rights. The backlash from corporate landlords and their allies persisted, but the movement's newfound strength and political leverage blunted their attacks. Fundraising improved as donors, both individual and institutional, were inspired by the coalition's progress and potential. Walter felt a deep sense of validation, but remained grounded. He knew the struggle was far from over, and that the system's inertia and entrenched interests required relentless vigilance. In private moments, he reflected on how far they had come, from small tenant meetings to citywide mobilizations, from legal battles to political breakthroughs. The alliance with Labour had been the turning point, transforming a fractured movement into a powerful force. Yet challenges loomed. Implementation of new policies faced bureaucratic hurdles, loopholes threatened to undermine protections, and the risk of co-optation lingered. Walter and his team redoubled efforts to monitor enforcement, engage communities, and push for continued reforms. The movement also expanded its vision, advocating for a more holistic approach to housing that included environmental sustainability, community ownership, and anti-displacement strategies. Walter spoke often about the importance of solidarity, reminding activists that the fight for housing was connected to broader struggles for justice, equity, and human dignity. As the chapter closes, the housing movement stands at a new crossroads, energized and unified, yet aware that true victory requires sustained effort, courage, and unwavering commitment. Walter's journey reflects the complexity and hope embedded in social change, a testament to the power of collective action to reshape society. The momentum gained by Walter's coalition had been undeniable, but with every victory came new challenges. The city was no longer ignoring the housing crisis, but the forces resisting change were more determined and creative than ever. As the fight moved from the streets into the halls of power, Walter found himself facing a daunting crossroads that tested his resolve and leadership. The passage of the mayor's housing initiative was a breakthrough, yet the real battle had only begun. Implementation stalled amid bureaucratic delays and legal skirmishes. Powerful real estate lobbyists launched aggressive campaigns to water down the new regulations, flooding city council meetings with allies and mobilizing misinformation. Campaigns in the media. Walter's coalition had to adapt quickly. They shifted focus toward grassroots organizing, mobilizing tenants and workers to attend hearings, testify publicly, and apply pressure on elected officials. It was exhausting and sometimes disheartening work, but the movement's core remained steadfast. One evening, Walter sat down with Anna, a longtime activist and one of the coalition's key strategists. The weight of the ongoing battle was evident on both their faces. "They're pushing back harder than we expected," Anna said, scrolling through the latest city council agenda packed with amendments designed to weaken tenant protections. Walter nodded, rubbing his temples. "It's like we take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but we can't let frustration blind us. This is a marathon, not a sprint." Anna smiled grimly. "Easier said than done. People are tired. Some activists are questioning if all this sacrifice will really pay off. Walter leaned back, letting the silence settle. We have to keep reminding them why this matters. These aren't just policies on paper. They're people's lives. Families on the brink, kids at risk of losing their homes. We owe it to them to stay the course. Around this time, the coalition also faced internal tensions. The rapid growth brought together a diverse group of voices, each with their own priorities and ideas about strategy. Disagreements over how aggressively to confront the city and whether to accept compromises created friction. At a packed meeting, debates grew heated. Some members advocated for more radical direct actions, blockades, rent strikes and public disruptions. Others urged patience, favoring negotiations and incremental progress through established political channels. Walter found himself in the difficult role of mediator, balancing passion with pragmatism. He understood the anger driving calls for radicalism, but also knew that alienating moderate allies and elected officials could jeopardize hard-won gains. "I get the frustration," Walter said calmly, addressing the room. "But we need a strategy that builds broad support, not burns bridges. Our power lies in our numbers and our ability to win hearts and minds." His words did not end the tension, but helped to ease the division, reminding everyone of the coalition's common purpose. Meanwhile, the media spotlight intensified. Coverage of the housing crisis moved beyond local outlets to national headlines. Walter and other leaders became frequent guests on talk shows and news panels, their message reaching wider audiences. But with visibility came risks. Personal attacks and smear campaigns targeted Walter and prominent activists. Accusations ranged from allegations of political manipulation to claims of inciting unrest. The stress weighed heavily on Walter, who was not used to the scrutiny. One afternoon, as he walked through a crowded neighborhood meeting, Walter noticed the wary looks and whispers among some attendees. A local journalist had recently published a piece questioning his motives, casting doubt on his leadership. Determined not to let negativity derail the movement, Walter addressed the group with honesty and openness. "I know there's skepticism, and that's understandable," he said. "Change is hard and people want to protect what's familiar, but I promise you this, everything we do is to secure safe, affordable homes for all of us. We're in this together." The room erupted in applause. That moment reaffirmed for Walter the importance of staying connected to the community, listening and leading with integrity. The coalition also began exploring innovative solutions to the housing crisis. Inspired by models from other cities and countries, they advocated for community land trusts, cooperative housing, and public-private partnerships that prioritized affordability and tenant control. Walter championed these ideas, seeing them as pathways towards sustainable change beyond short-term fixes. He spoke passionately about the need to reimagine housing as a human right and a foundation for social justice. Yet, despite these advances, the economic realities remained harsh. The city's housing market was still dominated by wealthy investors and speculators who viewed homes as assets for profit rather than shelter. Walter met regularly with economists, urban planners, and legal experts to refine policy proposals. They worked tirelessly to craft measures that could withstand legal challenges while delivering tangible benefits to tenants. One of the coalition's flagship proposals was a tax on vacant properties and speculative real estate purchases, designed to discourage absentee landlords and generate revenue for affordable housing projects. The idea was met with fierce opposition from powerful lobbyists, but garnered strong public support. Walter also pushed for expanded rent control laws that limited rent increases and guaranteed longer lease terms to prevent displacement. The policy aimed to provide stability for renters amid the city's skyrocketing housing costs. But the fight for these policies was brutal. At city council hearings, lobbyists employed every tactic, from paid experts casting doubt on economic impacts to orchestrated campaigns that flooded council members with calls and emails opposing the measures. Walter and coalition members responded by organizing their own rapid response teams, mobilizing tenants to speak out, exposing conflicts of interest, and shining a light on the real human costs of inaction. As public pressure mounted, cracks appeared in the city's political establishment. Some council members shifted their positions, fearing electoral backlash. Others privately admitted to Walter that the coalition's influence was reshaping the debate. Yet, Walter was acutely aware of the precariousness of these victories. He understood that meaningful change required more than policy. It demanded cultural shifts and sustained community empowerment. In a quiet moment, Walter visited a family who had been threatened with eviction despite the new laws. Their story was a stark reminder that legal protections alone were not enough without enforcement and vigilance. Seeing the fear and uncertainty in the family's eyes steeled Walter's determination. He realized that the movement had to focus as much on empowering tenants to know and defend their rights as on legislative battles. To that end, the coalition launched a comprehensive tenant education program, offering workshops, legal clinics, and rapid response hotlines. Volunteers trained community members to become tenant defenders, who could assist neighbors facing eviction or harassment. The program quickly became one of the movement's most successful initiatives, fostering solidarity and resilience. At the grassroots level, Walter also prioritized building bridges with other social justice movements, immigrant rights groups, racial justice organizations, environmental activists, recognizing that housing justice was intertwined with broader struggles. Through these alliances, the coalition broadened its base and amplified its voice. Joint actions and campaigns created a unified front that challenged systemic inequality on multiple fronts. As the year drew to a close, Walter reflected on the journey. The path had been fraught with setbacks and resistance, but the movement's growth and resilience inspired hope. He knew the road ahead remained uncertain. The forces opposed to change were formidable and would continue to adapt. But the coalition's foundation was stronger than ever, rooted in community, solidarity, and shared vision. Walter's story was not just one of battles and policies. It was a testament to the power of people coming together to reclaim their right to live with dignity and security. The crossroads they faced was not an endpoint, but a moment of reckoning and renewal. With renewed commitment, the fight for housing justice would continue, undaunted, unbroken, and unstoppable. The winter chill settled over the city, but the fire of the housing movement refused to wane. After months of fierce struggle, the coalition, led by Walter, found itself at a pivotal moment. What had once been a grassroots uprising was now a formidable force, commanding attention from every corner of society. Yet with growing influence came an urgent need for strategy, vision, and unity. Walter stood at the front of a packed community center, the hum of eager voices filling the air. The room was a kaleidoscope of faces, tenants, activists, local leaders, even a few city officials who had begun to see the merit in the coalition's cause. Walter felt a surge of responsibility settle in his chest. This was no longer just a fight for housing, it was becoming a movement for justice and dignity. He began, voice steady, "We've come far, but the fight isn't over. The system we're challenging is entrenched, and the resistance we face is fierce. But the power we hold lies in our unity, our shared stories, and our unwavering commitment." A woman near the front raised her hand. "What's next? We've seen some wins, but the evictions keep coming. The city promises change, but our neighbors are still losing their homes." Walter nodded, feeling the weight of that reality. Change takes time, and it takes pressure. We must keep pushing for enforcement of the laws we helped pass. That means staying vigilant, demanding accountability, and supporting each other. The crowd murmured in agreement, the energy both hopeful and determined. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Walter and the coalition's core strategists were hard at work planning the next phase. They knew that legal victories alone wouldn't secure lasting change. The root causes, speculation, gentrification, inequality, required bold innovation and broad coalitions. They began exploring partnerships with financial institutions willing to invest in affordable housing projects while insisting on strict community oversight. Walter advocated for housing as a human right to become a central narrative, transforming public perception. At the same time, a growing number of artists, musicians, and cultural leaders joined the movement, using their platforms to amplify the message and celebrate tenant resilience. Street murals depicting stories of displacement and hope appeared across neighborhoods, becoming symbols of resistance and solidarity. One evening, as Walter walked home after a coalition meeting, he passed a newly painted mural, a child holding a key with the words "Home is Hope" emblazoned beneath. It struck him deeply. This was more than activism, it was a cultural awakening. Yet the opposition was still formidable. Real estate moguls and lobbyists doubled down, launching sophisticated campaigns to sway public opinion. They framed affordable housing initiatives as threats to property values and economic growth, tapping into fears and prejudices. Walter met regularly with city officials, negotiating and advocating for policies that balance development with affordability. Some meetings were encouraging, others frustrating, but he maintained a steady resolve. At a tense hearing, a developer argued that rent controls would stifle investment and harm the city's economy. Walter countered, "Our economy is hollow if it leaves people homeless. Investment must benefit communities, not displace them." The exchange was fierce, but Walter's conviction resonated with many listening. Recognizing the need to engage the broader public, the coalition launched a citywide campaign to educate residents on the realities of the housing crisis and the benefits of inclusive policies. Town halls, social media drives, and neighborhood canvassing became daily routines. Walter also worked closely with tenant leaders to build leadership capacity, believing that those directly impacted should have the strongest voice. He organized training sessions on legal rights, organizing tactics and public speaking. One of those leaders, Maria, emerged as a powerful voice. A single mother facing eviction, Maria's story touched hearts across the city. Her speeches were raw, honest, and inspiring. During a televised debate, Maria recounted the trauma of nearly losing her home and the strength she found in community support. Her testimony helped sway undecided council members and galvanized public support. Walter watched with pride as Maria stood firm against well-funded opposition, embodying the movement's heart and soul. As momentum built, the coalition unveiled an ambitious proposal for a housing justice fund, a dedicated pool of resources for affordable housing, tenant services, and eviction prevention. The fund would be financed through a progressive tax on luxury real estate transactions and speculative property holdings. The proposal faced fierce lobbying and legal challenges, but also sparked a wave of grassroots activism. Rallies, petitions, and letter-writing campaigns filled City Hall steps, demonstrating the movement's growing power. Walter's leadership was tested repeatedly. Long nights, personal sacrifices, and moments of doubt pressed on him. But the growing solidarity and small victories fueled his determination. One morning, a breakthrough came. A city council vote narrowly approved the Housing Justice Fund. The victory was celebrated with cheers, tears, and renewed hope. Yet Walter knew this was just one milestone on a long journey. He reflected on how far they had come, from isolated protests to a unified movement capable of shaping policy and culture. The coalition's success proved that ordinary people, when organized and empowered, could confront entrenched power and demand justice. Walter's vision extended beyond housing. He imagined a city where everyone had a voice, where communities thrived together, and where dignity was a right, not a privilege. As spring blossomed, Walter and the coalition prepared for the next challenges. The fight for housing justice was far from over, but the tide was turning. From defiance to transformation, the movement was writing a new chapter, one of hope, resilience, and collective power. And in the heart of it all stood Walter, a testament to the belief that change was possible when people dared to dream and fought to make those dreams real. As the movement for housing justice continued to grow, a new realization dawned upon Walter and the coalition. The fight for affordable homes was inextricably linked to broader struggles for racial and economic justice. The injustices of housing were not isolated. They were woven into a larger fabric of systemic inequality. The coalition's vision had to expand, embracing a more holistic approach to change. Walter found himself at a crossroads, grappling with how to unite diverse communities, many of whom had faced historic marginalization and exclusion. This challenge was not just political, it was deeply personal and cultural. In a packed auditorium, Walter stood before a diverse crowd, gathered for the coalition's first-ever Justice and Housing Summit. The energy was electric, the air thick with anticipation. Leaders from civil rights organizations, labor unions, environmental groups, and faith communities had all come together, recognizing the urgent need to build solidarity across movements. Walter took a deep breath and began, "We are here today because we understand that housing justice is more than roofs and rent. It's about dignity, opportunity, and equality. Our struggles are connected. To win, we must stand together." A woman named Aisha, a longtime civil rights activist, stepped to the microphone next. Her voice was firm but hopeful. For too long, housing policies have perpetuated segregation and economic disparity. We need to confront these legacies head-on. This summit is a critical step toward that. The conversations that day were intense, at times uncomfortable, but always grounded in a shared commitment to change. Participants spoke candidly about the intersections of race, class, and housing, acknowledging past mistakes and envisioning a more just future. Walter felt a renewed sense of purpose. The coalition wasn't just fighting for affordable housing, it was becoming a vehicle for healing and empowerment across fractured communities. Outside the summit, the movement's cultural dimension blossomed. Artists collaborated on a citywide mural project called Walls of Hope, depicting stories of displacement, resistance, and resilience from various neighborhoods. These murals became gathering points and conversation starters, bringing people together in unexpected ways. Local musicians began composing songs inspired by the housing struggle, blending hip-hop, folk, and gospel traditions to tell stories of hardship and hope. Community theaters staged plays that dramatized eviction stories, sparking empathy and awareness. One evening, Walter attended a performance of Home Fires, a play about a family fighting eviction in a gentrifying neighborhood. The actors' raw emotion moved the audience to tears and applause. Afterward, a discussion panel explored policy solutions and community action. Walter realized that culture was a powerful catalyst, not just a reflection of struggle, but a force for transformation. Meanwhile, the coalition deepened its political engagement. Walter and key leaders met regularly with elected officials, pushing for comprehensive reforms that addressed both housing supply and systemic discrimination. They advocated for stronger tenant protections, anti-displacement measures, and equitable development policies. One breakthrough came when the City Council passed a historic ordinance requiring developers to include a significant percentage of affordable units in new projects. Though the ordinance faced legal challenges, it marked a major shift in policy and public sentiment. Walter knew that policy wins were fragile without sustained pressure and accountability. The coalition expanded its organizing efforts, training a new generation of leaders from impacted communities to monitor developments, report abuses, and mobilize quickly. At a neighborhood meeting, Maria, now a seasoned organizer, shared her journey. "When I first joined, I was scared and unsure. Now I stand here knowing my voice matters, and that together we can shape our city's future." Her story inspired many young people, some of whom had never been politically active before. The movement was growing not just in numbers, but in depth and diversity. Recognizing the power of alliances, Walter reached out to labor unions representing construction workers, advocating for good wages and fair working conditions in affordable housing projects. This coalition broadened the movement's base, linking tenant rights with workers' rights. Faith leaders also played a crucial role. Churches, mosques, and temples opened their doors as safe spaces for organizing, education, and mutual aid. Their moral authority added weight to the movement's calls for justice. Walter reflected on the words of Reverend James, a pastor who had become a trusted advisor. Justice isn't just about laws. It's about love in action. When we stand for our neighbors, we stand for God's kingdom on earth. In a city often divided by race, class, and geography, the coalition was creating a new narrative, one of shared humanity and common destiny. But challenges remained. Some critics accused the movement of being too radical or idealistic. Others warned that political compromises would dilute their goals. Walter understood these tensions, but believed that complexity was inevitable in any Transformative effort. One day, a fierce debate erupted within the coalition over a proposed compromise with developers. Some members feared the deal would sacrifice too much, while others saw it as a pragmatic step forward. Walter convened a special meeting. We must be honest about our principles and our strategy. Compromise can be a tool for progress if it doesn't betray our core values. Let's listen deeply and decide together. The dialogue was tough but respectful. In the end, the coalition adopted a nuanced position, supporting deals that delivered real affordable housing and community benefits, while continuing to challenge policies that favored profit over people. This ability to navigate complexity strengthened the movement and built trust among diverse stakeholders. As the year progressed, the coalition's influence expanded beyond the city. Walter was invited to speak at national conferences and forums, sharing lessons learned and inspiring other communities to organize. The media began portraying the coalition not as a fringe protest group, but as a serious, effective force for change. Walter's humble leadership style and the movement's inclusive vision resonated widely. Despite the successes, Walter never lost sight of the human cost behind the headlines. He frequently visited neighborhoods, listening to stories of struggle and resilience. He met a family who had been homeless for months, yet remained hopeful, a senior couple fighting to stay in their lifelong home, young activists planning the next actions. Each story fueled his resolve to push harder, to build a future where no one had to face displacement alone. On a cool spring evening, the coalition held a large rally in the city park. Thousands gathered, united by a shared vision and a powerful sense of possibility. Speakers took the stage, including Maria, Aisha, Reverend James, and Walter. Walter's closing words captured the moment. We are the authors of our future. Together we can rewrite the story of this city and build a home for all. The road is long, the fight is hard, but our hearts are stronger. As the crowd erupted in cheers and song, Walter felt a profound sense of gratitude and hope. The movement was no longer just about fighting back. It was about building something new, something lasting. The walls that once divided were coming down, replaced by bridges of understanding and solidarity. The power of unity was real, and the future was theirs to shape. Walter sat quietly in his small office, the glow from his laptop casting a soft light on the worn papers scattered across his desk. Outside, the city buzzed with the sounds of everyday life, but inside, the weight of the movement and his own journey pressed heavily on his mind. He knew that to push forward, the coalition needed to confront not only the present injustices, but also the painful history that shaped the housing crisis they were fighting against. The legacy of redlining, discriminatory lending, and racially motivated zoning laws was not just a chapter in textbooks, it was the lived reality of millions. Walter felt a personal responsibility to bring these stories into the light, to give voice to those silenced for decades. He recalled his grandmother's stories about growing up in a segregated neighborhood where opportunity was a distant dream. Her small house, squeezed between abandoned lots and industrial ruins, was a sanctuary in a city that refused to welcome her kind. Walter's commitment to justice was rooted in this family history, a testament to resilience and hope. Determined to deepen the coalition's understanding and empathy, Walter proposed a series of community forums titled Remembering Our Roots, Housing and History. These gatherings aim to educate, heal, and empower by bridging generational divides and highlighting how systemic racism shaped not only neighborhoods, but also individual lives. The first forum was held in an old church hall, packed with residents from diverse backgrounds. The air was thick with anticipation and raw emotion. Walter opened the session by sharing his grandmother's story, setting a tone of honesty and openness. Speakers followed, elderly residents recounting tales of forced relocations, families barred from buying homes in certain districts, children growing up amidst dilapidated schools and scarce resources. Younger activists listened intently, many hearing these accounts for the first time. One woman, Mrs. Johnson, wiped tears as she described how her family had been denied a mortgage because of their race, forced into overcrowded housing that affected her children's health and education. We didn't just lose homes, she said, we lost hope. The forum was not just a recounting of pain, but a collective reckoning. Participants shared how these past injustices echoed in current struggles: gentrification, pushing long-time residents out, landlords exploiting tenants, city planners ignoring community voices. Walter realized that healing required more than policies. It demanded recognition, reparative justice, and an honest conversation about race and power. The forums became a vital space for truth-telling and solidarity. Meanwhile, the coalition worked tirelessly to translate these stories into actionable demands. They drafted policy proposals that addressed historic harms, including reparations, programs, community land trusts, and stricter enforcement of anti-discrimination laws. The fight was uphill. Powerful interests pushed back fiercely, framing reparations as divisive and expensive. Yet Walter and his team persisted, mobilizing grassroots support and building alliances with racial justice organizations. One breakthrough came when the city council agreed to establish a reparative housing fund aimed at restoring home ownership opportunities for communities historically excluded. While modest, it symbolized a crack in the wall of denial and neglect. Walter also knew that confronting history was deeply personal. He wrestled with guilt and frustration. How had his generation allowed these injustices to persist? How could they ensure that the sacrifices of those before them were honored? In quiet moments, he reflected on the words of Dr. King. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. That belief fueled his resolve, reminding him that change, though slow, was possible through collective will. The coalition's commitment to history and healing resonated beyond their city. Media coverage highlighted the innovative forums and reparative policies, inspiring similar efforts nationwide. Walter was invited to speak at universities and conferences, emphasizing that true housing justice must reckon with racial history. Within the coalition, this period marked a turning point. The movement grew stronger and more inclusive, grounded not only in immediate demands, but also in a profound understanding of justice as both present and past. As spring turned to summer, Walter organized a commemorative event titled Honoring Our Ancestors, Building Our Future. Held in the city's largest park, the event brought together thousands, weaving together cultural performances, storytelling, and calls to action. Children painted murals representing their dreams for a just city. Elders shared songs and poems from their youth. Activists announced new campaigns linking housing justice to education, health, and environmental equity. Walter took the stage, his voice steady but passionate. We stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, who fought battles we still fight today. Their courage lights our way. Together, we will build a city where every person has a place to call home, a city that honors its history by making justice real. The crowd erupted in applause, a powerful affirmation of hope and solidarity, yet Walter remained aware that the journey was far from over. The systems they challenged were entrenched and complex, but by confronting history honestly and embracing the fullness of justice, the coalition was forging a new path. In the weeks that followed, Walter met with younger activists eager to carry the torch forward. He saw in their eyes the same fire that had driven his grandmother and so many others. One evening, as the sun set over the city skyline, Walter stood on a rooftop overlooking neighborhoods transformed by their efforts. New affordable housing, projects rising beside renovated schools, parks bustling with families, murals telling stories of resilience. He smiled quietly, feeling the weight of the past and the promise of the future blending into a powerful force for change. The fight for housing justice was more than a movement. It was a reckoning, a healing, and a new beginning. The city woke slowly that morning, its streets still slick from the overnight rain. Walter stood by the window of the coalition's modest office, watching the mist curl over the rooftops. It was hard to believe how far they had come. The journey had been grueling, filled with setbacks and small victories, heartbreak and triumph. But today felt different. Today felt like the beginning of something new. The coalition's recent successes had shaken the foundations of the city's housing system. The reparative housing fund was now active, providing grants and low-interest loans to families displaced by decades of discriminatory policies. Several community land trusts were taking root, giving residents real control over their neighborhoods. And perhaps most importantly, the conversation around housing had transformed from one dominated by economics and property values to one centered on justice, dignity, and human rights. Walter knew, though, that this was only the start. The real work, the rebuilding of trust, the healing of communities, the creation of sustainable opportunity lay ahead. The coalition's vision had always been bold, not just to reform housing policies, but to reshape the very idea of home and belonging. Today, a major milestone awaited them. After months of planning and advocacy, the City Council was scheduled to vote on a groundbreaking ordinance. It would mandate that a substantial portion of all new housing developments be affordable, enforce stronger tenant protections, and require developer contributions to community-led infrastructure projects. If passed, this law would mark a fundamental shift in urban development, one that could serve as a model for cities nationwide. The morning was filled with frenetic energy. Coalition members gathered in the conference room, reviewing speeches, finalizing talking points, and preparing for the long council session ahead. Walter moved through the room, offering encouragement, answering questions, and calming nerves. There was a shared sense of purpose, but also an undercurrent of tension. Powerful real estate interests were mounting fierce opposition, and the ayes-aye vote was expected to be tight. As the afternoon sun climbed, Walter and a small delegation arrived at City Hall. The chamber buzzed with anticipation. Supporters filled the gallery. Community leaders, families, activists, all hoping their presence would send a clear message. Walter took his seat beside the other speakers, feeling the weight of the moment. When his turn came, he rose steadily, looking out over the room packed with council members and spectators. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice clear. "We are here today because housing is more than a commodity. It is the foundation of community, security, and opportunity. For too long, the policies and practices governing our city's housing have excluded too many, pushed families to the margins, and fractured our neighborhoods." He spoke about the history they had uncovered, the stories shared at the forums, the tangible harms still felt. This ordinance is a step toward righting those wrongs. It will ensure that affordable housing is not an afterthought, but a priority. It will protect tenants from exploitation. It will require developers to contribute to the communities they build in, creating shared wealth and shared responsibility. Walter's words resonated. When he finished, others followed. From tenants who had faced eviction to young people who dreamed of a future in the city, the testimonies were raw, heartfelt, and powerful. The council debate was intense. Opposition. Speakers warned of economic consequences, claiming the ordinance would deter investment and raise costs. But supporters countered with data, examples from other cities, and moral appeals. Hours passed. The chamber grew weary but resolute. Finally, the vote. One by one, council members announced their decision. The room held its breath. When the tally was complete, the ordinance had passed by a narrow margin. A roar of applause filled the chamber and the gallery. Walter felt tears prick his eyes, a mixture of relief, pride, and the heavy awareness that the fight was not over. Outside, supporters spilled into the streets, chanting and celebrating. The moment was electric, a rare and precious victory for a movement born of pain and perseverance. In the weeks that followed, the coalition worked to ensure the ordinance's promises became reality. They partnered with community groups to oversee development projects, launched education campaigns to inform tenants of their rights, and monitored the use of funds with rigorous transparency. Slowly, the city's landscape began to change. Affordable housing units rose alongside market-rate developments. Families who had faced displacement returned to neighborhoods reborn. Community centers and parks flourished where once there had been neglect. Walter often visited these places, meeting residents, hearing their stories, and witnessing the tangible impact of their efforts. Each success fueled his determination to push harder, to dream bigger. But perhaps the most profound change was intangible, a shift in how people saw their city and themselves. Where despair had once taken root, hope was growing. People felt empowered to claim their right to the city, to participate in its future, and to demand justice. One evening, Walter stood at a community event celebrating the opening of a new affordable housing complex. Children ran through the gardens, laughter echoing under string lights. Neighbors exchanged stories, food, and smiles. Walter's eyes swept over the scene, heart full. A young woman approached him, a tenant leader named Maria. She smiled brightly. "Thank you, Walter, for fighting for us, for believing we deserve a place to call home." He nodded, humbled. "This is your victory, Maria. We all stand on the shoulders of those who refuse to give up." As the night deepened, Walter found a quiet moment to reflect. The road ahead would remain challenging. Economic pressures, political opposition, and systemic barriers would persist, but the movement had built something resilient, a foundation of solidarity, knowledge, and justice. He thought back to the faces and voices that had fueled the struggle, the elders who shared their memories, the tenants who fought for their rights, the young activists who carried the torch. Their courage was a beacon. Walter knew that the true measure of their success was not in laws passed or buildings erected, but in the lives transformed and the promise of a more just society. The struggle for housing justice was far from over. But the dawn of a new day was breaking, a day when the right to shelter, safety, and dignity would no longer be a privilege, but a reality for all. The auditorium was quiet, every eye fixed on Walter as he stepped to the podium. The afternoon sun filtered softly through the tall windows, casting a warm glow over the crowd gathered, to honor a lifetime of service and sacrifice. Walter's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the microphone, the weight of the moment pressing, gently but firmly on his shoulders. For years he had been the silent observer, the steadfast shadow behind his father, a man whose legacy was etched in the history of their nation, yet whose personal sacrifices remained largely unseen. Today Walter was ready to speak, not just as a son, but as a man shaped by the unwavering example of the father he admired. "My father once told me," Walter began, voice steady but thick with emotion, "that leadership isn't about power or command. It's about responsibility. Responsibility to the people you serve and to the values you uphold. Growing up, I didn't always understand what he meant. I saw a man who was often distant, burdened by duties that pulled him away from home. But as I stand here now, I see clearly the depth of his love, expressed not in words, but in the sacrifices he made every day." The crowd listened intently as Walter's gaze scanned the faces before him, veterans who had fought alongside his father, family members who had endured the same hardships, and young people whose futures depended on the lessons of the past. Our relationship wasn't perfect. There were moments of silence where words should have been spoken, and times when distance felt like the only bridge between us. But through it all, I carried a quiet admiration, a respect so deep it was sometimes hard to voice. He was my commander in life, teaching me the strength it takes to stand firm in conviction and the humility to listen even when it's difficult. Walter paused, swallowing hard as memories flooded his mind. He thought of the late nights when his father would return home exhausted, the missed birthdays and holidays that left gaps in their family story. Yet he also remembered the unspoken lessons, the way his father's eyes lit up when recounting tales of comradeship, the small tokens of encouragement hidden in folded letters, and the enduring hope that their sacrifices would pave a better path for those who came after. "To the next generation," Walter continued, his voice now resonating with quiet authority, "I want to say this: honor the past, but do not be trapped by it. Learn from the courage and resilience of those who came before you, but forge your own path with integrity and compassion. Responsibility is not a burden, it is a privilege. Gratitude is not just an act, but a way of living." He looked down, briefly gathering his thoughts, then lifted his head with renewed clarity. "In honoring my father today, I honor all the silent sacrifices made by families like ours, the ones who stand behind the scenes, the ones who bear the weight of absence and uncertainty. May their stories be told, may their courage inspire, and may their legacy be carried forward with pride and purpose." As Walter stepped away from the microphone, a hushed wave of applause rippled through the hall. Faces that had once been stern softened with understanding, eyes glistened with unshed tears. It was more than a speech. It was a testament to the bonds that shape us, the lessons that define us, and the love that sustains us. Later, as he embraced his aging father, Walter felt a profound sense of peace. Time had etched lines of hardship and joy on both their faces, but it had also carved a bridge of mutual respect and deep, unspoken love. In that moment, Walter realized that being a son and a commander were not roles to be chosen, but a shared journey, a legacy written not only in history books, but in the hearts of those who carry it forward. Walter sat quietly by the window of his modest living room, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. The stillness of the room was a stark contrast to the whirlwind of thoughts inside his mind. For decades, he had lived in the shadow of his own achievements, quietly shouldering the weight of expectations and memories that few could fully understand. But today something was different. Today marked a turning point in how he saw himself. The recognition he had received at the ceremony still lingered in his heart, not as a fleeting moment of praise, but as a long overdue acknowledgement of a lifetime, lived with integrity and sacrifice. For years, Walter had carried a quiet burden, the sense that his worth was measured only by what others could see, or the medals pinned to his chest. Yet beneath the accolades, there was a man yearning for more than just external validation. He thought back to his younger days, when strength was defined by physical endurance and the ability to command respect through action. Now in the twilight of his life, he found himself grappling with a different kind of struggle, the battle to maintain dignity and self-worth in a world that too often dismissed the elderly as forgotten or burdensome. Walter recalled the times when he felt invisible, passed over in conversations and decisions, or pitied for his age and frailty, rather than celebrated for his wisdom and experience. It was a subtle yet profound pain, a quiet erosion of identity that many his age endured in silence. But today, sitting alone with his thoughts, Walter resolved to reclaim that identity. He understood now that respect was not something to be demanded or expected. It had to be earned through how one chose to live each day, even in the face of physical decline and changing societal attitudes. He rose from his chair, walking slowly but purposefully toward a small shelf filled with photographs, snapshots of a life marked by dedication, love, and perseverance. There was a picture of him as a young man, standing proudly in his uniform, eyes bright with hope and determination. Beside it, a photo of his family, their smiles frozen in time, a testament to the bonds that had sustained him through every trial. Walter's fingers traced the edges of the frames as memories flooded back, stories of hardship and triumph, of friendships forged in the crucible of adversity, and of the quiet moments of joy that had punctuated a life of service. He realized that his value was not diminished by the passing years. Rather, it was enriched by the depth of his experiences and the legacy he carried forward. The next morning, Walter took a slow walk through the neighborhood park, breathing in the crisp air and feeling the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat. He observed the world around him, the laughter of children playing, the nods of recognition from neighbors, the peaceful coexistence of generations sharing the same space. It was a small community, but it reminded him of the interconnectedness of life, the continuous thread linking past, present, and future. Walter's thoughts turned to the future he hoped to shape, not just for himself, but for those who would come after him. He wanted to be seen not as a relic of the past, but as a living testament to resilience and hope. His story, he realized, was part of a larger narrative about dignity in aging, about the importance of honoring those who had paved the way. Back at home, he began writing in his journal, a habit he had recently revived. Words poured out, reflections on his life, lessons learned, hopes for the future. Through writing, Walter found a new voice, a way to articulate feelings that had long been buried beneath layers of stoicism and duty. He wrote about the importance of self-respect, the courage it took to face each day with grace, and the quiet power of choosing joy amidst challenges. He acknowledged the pain of loneliness and the longing for connection, but also the strength found in acceptance and forgiveness, both of oneself and others. Walter's journal became a companion, a mirror reflecting his journey towards self-recognition. Each entry deepened his understanding of who he was beyond his roles and titles. He was more than a veteran, more than a father or husband. He was a man deserving of respect simply because he existed, because he had lived and loved and endured. Ensue. The weeks that followed, Walter began to share his thoughts with close friends and family. Conversations that once skirted around difficult topics now took on new depth. He spoke openly about his fears and hopes, his struggles with identity, and the need to redefine what it meant to grow old with dignity. His loved ones responded with warmth and encouragement, affirming his value and reminding him of the profound impact he had on their lives. These exchanges rekindled Walter's spirit, filling him with a renewed sense of purpose. He also became more active in community events, offering to speak at local gatherings about the experiences of aging veterans. His stories resonated deeply, sparking conversations about respect, empathy, and the societal changes needed to better support the elderly. Walter's presence became a source of inspiration, a living example of how one can face the challenges of aging with courage and grace. His journey was not without hardship, but it was marked by an unwavering commitment to dignity and hope. One evening, as he sat quietly by the fire, Walter reflected on how far he had come. The journey to self-recognition was ongoing, but he no longer saw it as a solitary path. Surrounded by love, memories, and a community that valued him, Walter felt a profound peace. He understood that true respect came not from accolades or recognition alone, but from embracing one's worth with humility and confidence. It was a lesson he hoped to pass on, not just to his family, but to all who faced the inevitable passage of time. Walter's story was a testament to the enduring human spirit, the ability to find light even in the darkest moments, to reclaim identity in the face of invisibility, and to live fully with purpose and grace. As he closed his journal for the night, Walter smiled softly. Tomorrow was another day, another opportunity to live authentically and to continue his journey, not as a man defined by age, but as a soul enriched by a lifetime of experience, ready to face whatever lay ahead with courage and hope. Walter's story, though deeply personal, was never just about one man's journey. It echoed far beyond the walls of his modest home, resonating with a society grappling with how it honors or neglects its elders. In the quiet moments after the ceremony, as the applause faded and the spotlight dimmed, a much larger conversation began to unfold about the way America treats those who have given so much, yet often feel forgotten. In many ways, Walter's experience was emblematic of a broader issue: how modern society, despite its progress, struggles to uphold the dignity and respect of older generations. For veterans, this challenge is particularly acute. Having dedicated years, sometimes decades, to defending their country, many find themselves sidelined when their active service ends, their sacrifices acknowledged in rhetoric, but often overlooked in practice. The problem wasn't new. Throughout history, the elderly have faced marginalization, sometimes hidden in plain sight. As the population ages, these challenges grow more urgent. Walter's story brought to light a critical truth. Respect for elders is not merely about politeness or tradition. It is about recognizing the invaluable contributions of those who came before and ensuring their voices remain part of the collective narrative. Walter had spent years feeling the sting of invisibility. Society had shifted its focus toward youth and productivity, often equating worth with economic output and physical capability. The elderly, especially those with health issues or limited mobility, were too often seen through the lens of dependency rather than autonomy. This cultural mindset created a vicious cycle. When elders feel undervalued, their sense of identity erodes, and they retreat further into isolation. For veterans, this isolation is compounded by unique psychological and physical wounds. Many face challenges invisible to the public eye: PTSD, chronic pain, the loss of camaraderie that once defined their lives. Walter's public recognition ignited a wave of reflection among community leaders, policymakers, and citizens alike. It became a catalyst for dialogue about how to build a society that truly honors its elders, not only in words but in deeds. The conversation touched on several critical areas. First, there was the issue of societal attitudes. Respect cannot be mandated, but it can be cultivated through education and awareness. Schools began incorporating lessons on the value of aging, teaching younger generations to see elders as sources of wisdom rather than burdens. Media campaigns highlighted stories like Walter's to challenge stereotypes and foster empathy. Second, the structure of healthcare and social services needed reform. Veterans often faced bureaucratic hurdles in accessing the care they required. Advocates called for streamlined processes, better mental health support, and community-based programs that could provide companionship and practical assistance. Third, there was a call to rethink community engagement. Many seniors lived alone, disconnected from neighbors and social networks. Creating spaces for meaningful interaction, whether through senior centers, volunteer opportunities, or intergenerational programs, became a priority. Walter himself began to participate in these initiatives, lending his voice and experience to efforts aimed at creating a more inclusive environment for elders. His presence at community forums was a reminder that aging was not a decline, but a new chapter filled with potential. Beyond policy and programs, Walter's story underscored the moral responsibility each individual holds. Respect begins with small acts, a listening ear, a kind word, an invitation to share stories. These seemingly simple gestures weave a social fabric that upholds the dignity of every person, regardless of age. His journey also challenged the prevailing notion of what it means to age successfully. Rather than focusing solely on physical health or independence, it emphasized the importance of purpose, connection, and recognition. Walter's reflections and public speaking engagements inspired many to rethink their own relationships with their elders. Families began to prioritize conversations with aging parents and grandparents, seeking to understand their experiences and honor their legacies. For the veterans community, Walter became a symbol of resilience and advocacy. His story highlighted the gaps in support and the urgent need for systemic change. Organizations mobilized to improve outreach and resources, recognizing that no one who served should feel abandoned. As the movement gained momentum, local governments started allocating more funding toward elder care and veteran services. Partnerships formed between non-profits, healthcare providers, and community groups to address the holistic needs of seniors. Walter witnessed these changes with cautious optimism. He understood that transformation would not happen overnight, but the first steps were encouraging. The conversation had shifted from passive recognition to active engagement, from charity to justice. In a poignant moment during a town hall meeting, Walter addressed a crowd of policymakers, service providers, and citizens. His voice steady but filled with emotion, he spoke not just as a veteran but as a representative of all elders seeking dignity. "We are not relics of the past," he said. "We are living stories, carriers of history, bearers of wisdom. To honor us is to honor the very foundation of your communities. We ask not for pity, but for respect and inclusion." His words resonated deeply, sparking a renewed commitment to action. The audience understood that respecting elders was not merely an act of kindness, but a societal imperative that enriched everyone. Walter's advocacy also touched on the importance of mental health. He shared his own struggles with loneliness and identity, encouraging others to seek help and break the stigma surrounding emotional well-being in older adults. This openness sparked dialogue about the emotional dimensions of aging, a topic often overlooked in public discourse. Mental health programs tailored to seniors began gaining traction, incorporating peer support and counseling services. As the community rallied around these efforts, Walter found a renewed sense of purpose. His later years were not defined by decline, but by engagement and influence. He saw himself as a bridge between generations, a living testament to the power of respect and recognition. Walter's story was a microcosm of a greater societal need to embrace aging as a vital and enriching phase of life. It challenged communities to reconsider how they value and integrate elders into the social fabric. This shift had ripple effects. Younger people began to see aging not as a fearsome decline, but as a stage filled with opportunity for growth and contribution. Families grew closer, communities more interconnected. Walter often reflected on the simple truth that had come to define his later years. Respect is not an automatic gift of age, but a choice made by every member of society. It is built through empathy, understanding, and genuine connection. In this new cultural landscape, the elderly were no longer sidelined figures, but central players in shaping a compassionate and just society. Walter's legacy was not just the medals he wore, but the hearts he touched and the minds he opened. As he looked toward the future, Walter hoped his story would inspire lasting change, a society where every person, regardless of age, feels seen, valued, and respected. He believed that honoring elders was a reflection of the collective soul of a nation. In the end, Walter's journey illuminated a universal truth. The measure of a society is found in how it treats its most vulnerable and its most experienced. By embracing this lesson, America had the potential to build a future that truly honored the dignity of every life. And in that vision, Walter saw hope, not just for himself, but for generations yet to come. Walter stepped outside into the warm, morning sun, a subtle smile playing across his lips. The world hadn't changed overnight, but something inside him had shifted. The weight of years, the invisible burdens he once carried alone, seemed lighter now. The recognition, the respect, and the connections forged through the past weeks had breathed new life into him. He felt renewed, not just in body but in spirit. Returning to his daily routine, Walter's perspective was transformed. What once felt mundane was now filled with possibility. He greeted neighbors with genuine warmth, stopped to chat with familiar faces, and made a point to listen more deeply. Each interaction became an opportunity to engage, to build bridges, to inspire. His community noticed. Walter's presence, once quiet and reserved, was now a beacon of vitality and hope. Local groups welcomed his involvement enthusiastically. He volunteered at the community center, sharing stories of resilience and lessons learned from a lifetime of service. His words carried weight, the lived experience behind them, compelling others to listen and reflect. Walter also found himself mentoring younger veterans. They came to him not just for advice, but for the example he embodied, a man who had weathered hardship and returned with grace and purpose. He spoke openly about the challenges of aging, mental health, and the importance of seeking help. His candor encouraged many to break down their own walls of silence and shame. In addition to veteran affairs, Walter expanded his efforts to broader elder advocacy. He collaborated with local agencies to promote programs designed to reduce isolation among seniors. Whether organizing social outings, technology workshops, or health seminars, Walter was at the heart of it all, a tireless advocate for dignity and connection. His activism extended beyond community walls. Walter began speaking at schools, sharing his story with students and teachers alike. He urged them to honor their elders, to recognize the wisdom they hold, and to carry forward the values of respect and gratitude. Many were deeply moved by his testimony, and some even pledged to become volunteers in elder care programs. At home, Walter's relationships flourished. The distance between him and his family, once marked by unspoken tensions and missed opportunities, slowly dissolved. Dinners became more frequent and lively. Conversations once guarded grew honest and heartfelt. Walter found joy in watching his grandchildren grow, eager to share with them the lessons of his life, stories of courage, humility, and perseverance. This renewal of family ties was not without effort. Walter consciously chose to let go of past grievances and embraced forgiveness. He understood that time was precious, and every moment together was a gift. His family, in turn, responded with love and renewed commitment. They recognized the man he was, beyond the years and struggles, a man full of wisdom and warmth. Walter's journey was a testament to the power of connection and purpose. He no longer saw aging as a slow fading away, but as a new chapter to be written. Each day held opportunities to learn, to give, and to grow. The spark that once flickered weakly now burned brightly, fueled by a community that had come to value him and a family that had reclaimed him. His health, though still a concern, no longer defined him. Medical appointments and therapies became part of a broader plan for well-being that included social engagement, mental stimulation, and physical activity. Walter embraced this holistic approach, understanding that vitality came from nurturing body, mind, and soul. His newfound energy spilled over into creative pursuits as well. Walter took up writing, penning reflections and memoirs that captured the essence of his experiences. These writings became a source of inspiration not only for himself, but for others facing the challenges of aging. His words were honest, often tinged with humor and hope, offering a roadmap for resilience. The community responded with enthusiasm. Local publications featured his essays, and invitations to speak at conferences and events followed. Walter embraced these opportunities, seeing them as chances to amplify the message of respect for elders and the value of intergenerational solidarity. Amidst these activities, Walter remained grounded in humility. He knew that the journey of transformation was ongoing, marked by highs and lows. Yet he faced each day with a renewed sense of purpose, committed to making a positive impact wherever he could. His story also rekindled conversations within his social circles about the importance of planning for aging with dignity. Walter advocated for policies that supported home care, accessible transportation, and affordable health care, recognizing that these practical elements were crucial for maintaining independence and quality of life. Walter's example inspired others to take action. Friends and neighbors began organizing local initiatives, from neighborhood watch programs to cultural events celebrating elder contributions. The community grew stronger, bound by a shared commitment to support one another across generations. This ripple effect extended even further. Stories of Walter's transformation and advocacy spread through social media, reaching audiences beyond his town. Messages poured in from people who saw in his journey a reflection of their own hopes and fears about aging. Through it all, Walter remained focused on the essentials: kindness, respect, and connection. He often reflected on how these simple values had the power to transform lives and communities. In his conversations, he stressed that no one should be invisible or forgotten, no matter their age or circumstance. His family became partners in his mission. Together, they organized gatherings that brought elders and youth together, events that celebrated heritage, shared knowledge, and fostered mutual respect. These moments reinforced the bonds of love and community, creating memories that would endure. Walter also found solace in nature. Daily walks in the park became rituals of reflection and renewal. The changing seasons mirrored his own evolution, each cycle bringing new challenges and blessings. In these quiet moments, he felt a deep connection to life's continuity, a sense of peace that grounded his spirit. As the years passed, Walter's legacy grew not only through his public work, but also through the countless small acts of kindness he inspired. A neighbor helped with chores, a friend stopped by for a visit, a stranger offered a smile, all ripples of the respect and dignity Walter championed. His story was a living testament to the idea that age is not a barrier to impact. Instead, it can be a source of strength and wisdom, a foundation upon which communities can build a more compassionate future. Walter knew that his journey was part of a larger narrative, one that transcended individual lives to touch the heart of society itself. The lessons he embodied were universal: to honor elders, to value every stage of life, and to recognize that our greatest strength lies in our shared humanity. He faced each new day with gratitude and hope, confident that the seeds planted would continue to grow long after he was gone. His smile, once rare, was now a constant companion, a symbol of resilience, love, and enduring spirit. Walter's journey was far from over. The path ahead held both challenges and opportunities, but he walked it with courage and grace, ready to embrace whatever came next. In doing so, he showed the world that the true measure of a life well lived is not found in years alone, but in the love and impact one leaves behind. And with that, Walter continued forward, a man transformed, a community strengthened, and a legacy secured. Walter stood on his porch one late afternoon, gazing out across the horizon as the sun dipped low, casting a warm amber glow over the neighborhood. The world around him hummed with life, children playing, neighbors chatting, birds settling in for the night. But his thoughts were far deeper, rooted in reflection and hope. He thought about the winding path he had traveled, from hardship to recognition, from isolation to community. His journey had been long and at times difficult, yet it had taught him the enduring value of respect, connection, and purpose. As he watched the sky fade from gold to twilight, Walter understood that this moment marked both an ending and a beginning. The chapters of his life had unfolded with countless lessons, but none more important than the realization that true worth is never diminished by age or circumstance. People are more than their years, more than their struggles or limitations. Each individual carries a unique spark, an essence deserving of dignity, honor, and love. Walter's story was personal, yet it resonated far beyond his own experience. It was a mirror held up to society, a call to recognize the overlooked and the forgotten, especially among the elderly and veterans. His life reminded those who listened that the value of a human being is not erased by time, but is enriched by the legacy they leave behind, the wisdom passed on, the love shared, and the lives touched. The respect Walter had finally received was not merely a reward for endurance, but a vital affirmation of his identity and humanity. It was a message to everyone watching and listening that elders are treasures, custodians of history and culture, deserving not only of care, but of genuine inclusion and appreciation. This message extended beyond families and communities, demanding attention from policymakers, institutions, and the very fabric of society. Walter hoped that the conversations sparked by his journey would continue to grow, that people would take to heart the importance of honoring those who came before them, not out of obligation, but out of heartfelt gratitude and understanding. He wished for a future where aging would be embraced as a natural and enriching stage of life, rather than a burden or a marginalization. His reflections also touched on the idea of legacy, not just what one leaves behind materially, but the intangible impact on others' lives. Walter believed that each act of kindness, each moment of empathy, and each expression of respect creates ripples that extend far beyond the individual. These ripples build stronger, more compassionate communities, weaving together generations in bonds of mutual care. Walter's family had been central to this transformation. The renewed closeness, the shared stories and laughter, the unspoken support, all of these were gifts that reinforced his sense of belonging. He treasured the moments with his grandchildren, seeing in their eyes the future he hoped to help shape, a world where elders are revered and humanity's collective memory is preserved through love and respect. He was also aware that this journey was ongoing for many others. Walter's story was one chapter among millions, each filled with their own struggles and triumphs. He hoped his experience would inspire others to speak up, to seek connection, and to refuse invisibility. He believed that by lifting each other, society could become more just and humane. Walter's thoughts turned to the broader social context, the systemic challenges that often leave older adults isolated or neglected. He reflected on the need for policy changes, better healthcare access, and community support systems that honor the dignity of every individual, regardless of age. His advocacy work was far from over. It was now part of his purpose to keep pushing for these changes and to encourage others to join the cause. He imagined a future where every elder's voice would be heard and valued, where no one would feel forgotten or cast aside. This vision filled him with a quiet determination, a belief that even small actions could create lasting change. Walter knew that change required patience and persistence, but also faith in the goodness of people and the power of community. As the stars began to twinkle in the deepening sky, Walter felt a profound sense of peace. The struggles of the past no longer weighed heavily on him. Instead, they had been transformed into wisdom and compassion. He was ready to face whatever days remained with openness, gratitude, and an unwavering commitment to the values he held dear. He looked forward to continuing his work, to sharing his story wherever it might inspire hope, and to living each day as a testament to the idea that human dignity is timeless. Walter believed that every life mattered, that every individual's journey was worthy of honor, and that the bonds between generations could heal and uplift society. In this open ending, full of promise rather than finality, Walter saw the true meaning of legacy. It was not a closed book, but a living dialogue, passed on through actions, stories, and relationships. It was a reminder that no one is truly alone and that respect and kindness have the power to transcend all boundaries. He smiled, feeling the cool evening breeze on his face, grateful for the journey, hopeful for the future, and deeply committed to the message his life had come to embody. The path was still unfolding, and Walter walked it with courage, love, and the certainty that the best was yet to come. And so, with the sky darkening gently around him, Walter looked forward, not with fear or regret, but with an open heart and a soul full of hope. His story was one of resilience, transformation, and enduring humanity, and he entrusted it to the generations who would carry it forward, knowing that respect for every life, every age, and every person is the foundation of a truly compassionate world.